All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Stewart Podcast. So happy to have you here. We do this every Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And today we have two guests, and I really love doing this. The last time we had two guests, it was a couple as well. And these two I've known for at least over a year now, probably 2 years now that we've been connecting, and it's Tiffany Barsotti and Paul Mills. So without getting into the personal history that we have together, many conversations that we've shared, I want to show you the breadth of knowledge that these two guests bring, and then we'll dive deeper into what we're going to get into with our topics. So Reverend Tiffany Barsotti is an internationally renowned medical intuitive, a spiritual healer, and a clinician and researcher of subtle energy, biofield therapies, and energy psychology. She received her master's in theology and energy medicine with special emphasis in medical and spiritual counseling from CoHost University Graduate Seminary. There is a whole host of other educational background points that I could make here, but the thing that I want to drill into with Tiffany, to advance her clinical and research activities, she utilizes biofield devices to measure the human biofield, subtle energy interactions related to mind-body mechanisms. And this goes deep. It's really beautiful. With Paul J. Mills, he's a professor and chief at the University of California, San Diego's Department of Family Medicine and Public Health. He's also the director of the Center of Excellence for Research and Training in Integrative Health. He's the director of research for the Deepak Chopra Foundation with a focus on meditation and yoga within.
Sorry, everyone. We might be experiencing a little technical difficulties here with Skype. I think our call just dropped. 1 second, everyone. We'll be right back.
Let's get to it on the Stewart Podcast. Did it freeze up, Gordo?
We're good.
Okay.
A little bit of a bump. It was the Skype, but we're back. So we'll jump right to it. We might have lost a little bit of the intro there. Sorry about that, everyone. Just a little bit of Skype issues, but let's make sure we got everything clear.
All good. Well, I mean, you must have heard at least some of it. We have Paul Mills, Tiffany Barsotti here. They are friends, but they are also really incredible minds that we should utilize this time and dive straight in. So first, let me just introduce you both. Paul and Tiffany, thank you again so much for being here. I appreciate your time.
Love it. Ben. Hi.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. And so we got Gordo over there. We're still working on the
yeah, it was just perfectly set up. So do you guys want to jump quickly to the starting soon screen? Let me get a reset and then we'll jump right back in. Just that way, so that's easier for the crowd. All right. Sorry guys, we'll be back in 1 sec.
Well, I love unconventional intros to shows. So again, Let's say welcome to Paul Mills and Tiffany Barsotti. Thank you so much for your time.
Hi, Ben. It's a pleasure. It's great to see you again.
Pleasure
Yep,
to be
that's
here.
great. We got Gordo over here in the corner, and taking care of all those small technical fires that seem to come up every now and then. So let's hop straight into it. To be perfectly honest, I actually knew Tiffany before I knew you two together, because I had watched Open Minds, and I saw an episode where, Tiffany, you were talking about a book that I had just gotten, and that's Stephen Porges's The Polyvagal Theory. And that was the first time that I'd heard anybody else talking about it in a context other than strictly academic and, people who are peer reviewing, whatever, taking a look at his research. But you were the first time that I'd heard it even brought out a little bit further into a spiritual context. And I would love, that was on Open Minds with Regina Meredith on Gaia. And then later I ended up interviewing Paul on Healing Matrix, talking about gratitude and the whole person. I know this is going to be a really in-depth conversation, so I just want to dive in maybe with you, Tiffany. Like, what got you looking down that rabbit hole of polyvagal theory? Because it's not something I've heard many other people just happen upon and then bring it into such a worldview as yours.
Well, it's kind of curious because Stephen Porges's theory came out the same year that I was defending my master's thesis. And my master's thesis is on the topic of there being, my theory is that there's a nexus to the body-mind connection, and that there is a physiology to presence and transcendence, and that we can look to the more esoteric physiology that gives us information. And when I learned of Stephen Porges's work on the polyvagal theory, it was from one of my committee members with whom I had to defend my thesis. And it was right before I had to defend, and I gotten into barely a readable article because it was before there was a book published, before there was anything. And I was like, what is this? I know it's important, but what is this and how does it relate? So my thesis dealt with this little known chakra called the alta major that just happens to line up at the branch where the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve, that branches out of the brainstem and diversely moves its way. The 10th, the vagus for Latin means the wanderer. So it's the nerve that connects all of our, maybe not all of, but a majority of our organs in our body. So respiration, or rest and digest, it's very important to our entire nervous system, parasympathetic and sympathetic. Then that was matched with the reticular activating system, and this little known chakra called the alta major, the reticular activating system, and the vagus nerve. So that's where the sort of rabbit hole that I was on for about 5 years at graduate seminary. I studied with Norm Shealy and Carolyn Mace. And Norm said, if you don't know his work, he was a Harvard trained, or he actually taught at Harvard. He was a neuroscientist and neurosurgeon. And he said, Tiffany, you're crazy for taking this on, but it's really important. So it was this mix of, and I always saw a spiritual connection. And of course, with anything with the alta major chakra, which is not really talked about in many cosmologies, and it's known as the mouth of God in several of them. And in Yogananda's work, he spoke to it with where the kriyas are really emanating, where you're making a connection through the breath work at the medulla. And there's many more details, layers that we could go into here. But when I read Porges's work, I was like, oh my God, please don't tell me that I have to defend this on top of what I'm already trying to put together. And luckily I didn't have to, because his theory was way too new at the time. And since then, now I absolutely see this layering effect of how relevant they are. Stephen Porges as a scientist really isn't so keen on having the spiritual conversation and said, you have it. So that's kind of what happened actually in a conversation that Paul and I had with Stephen Porges a couple of years ago.
Well, that was in the Boulderado Hotel before Tiff was going to go on the next episode of Open Minds. So we chatted with Stephen about his theories and how it might relate to some of Tiff's spiritual interests.
Wow. So was Stephen also being interviewed? Was he another guest?
No, we were on the phone with him.
Oh, okay.
At our hotel.
I would love for the audience to better understand just so my understanding of the polyvagal theory is that there isn't just the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. It's not just a binary when one is on, the other is off, and vice versa, but that there's almost a ladder effect. And the third of, at least the other part, there's sympathetic, parasympathetic, and then also the social nervous system. Mm-hmm. Is that, help me understand the way that connects with our facial expressions as well. Do you understand those connections?
Well, I understand it from what I've read of Porges's, but also what I intuitively put together is also related to the ears. And remember that the vagus is branching everywhere. So you've got afferent and efferent, which means up and down fibers. And much of the medical literature, by the way, isn't just saying only the sympathetic is on the right side of the body and only the parasympathetic is the left side of the body, which is how it has been thought of before. And what Stephen Porges is introducing with the social is that a third branch, and that has to do with the myelinated and the demyelinated vagus in its properties. And it's demyelinated from the diaphragm up and myelinated from the diaphragm down. Well, when we are listening to voices or receiving information through our eyes, by the way, it's been written in Norse Transtender's book. I think I'm butchering his name. I apologize. And others. I think Bruce Lipton have also done some of this science of measuring the amount of inputs. So it's said to have that just our eyes have 10 million bits of information per second being processed. Well, only about 40 bits per second can actually cognitively be processed per second. So where's all that other information going? And that our nervous system is digesting it in some ways. So you can think about that as our relationship to our inner world, to our outer world. And that's also how it connects to our social activities, how it is that we engage. Are we fully present? What's the tone of your voice? Are you making eye contact? Do your facial changes actually change based on what it is that you might be emoting? And that's part of that social system. So I don't know that I would explain it in the same way that Stephen Porges explains it, but that's the way I see it working in alignment with also biofield. So
Interesting. I remember I had just read a part in there where he was saying that he was working with autistic children, and there was something when you mentioned the connection with the ear as well. There's something that happens with prosodic speaking that increases the felt sense of safety, a little bit more connectedness with the one speaking, and also just in their nervous system helped them quite a bit was listening to or themselves doing prosodic speaking, but for the most part, probably listening to others. And prosodic is just a little bit more dynamic, up and down, when it comes to the dynamics of the voice. So I find that really interesting as well. What I would love to kind of switch into is, so before we get into, because I definitely want to connect about how you two connected as a couple, but I would love to just ask Paul, you getting to the point of where you were speaking about gratitude and the whole person. What in your life led you down that path where that was something that you would be going to Gaia to be interviewed about?
So it was a few things then, Ben. as you had said at the introduction, I've been primarily a scientist and professor at the University of California, San Diego. Much of my research is focused in the area of cardiovascular diseases and particularly heart failure. And there was a turn in our work in the lab there where we started looking more at interventions rather than just understanding what's the pathophysiology of heart failure as far as mechanisms. And one of those interventions, we had started reading about positive psychology, and gratitude came up again and again. You might recall there's that old adage, a grateful heart is a healthy heart. So we thought, well, let's test that in this group of patients, and that's what we did. So our findings are so, I'd have to say, significant, not only statistically, which scientists always need, to publish their work, but also just clinically, and also just personally. So that's what got me started. We did a couple of studies, we published the research, and that was disseminated and quoted quite widely in the media.
Wow.
Well, I'm curious, can you talk about specifically some of the results, the science, the conclusions it came to?
Of course. Yeah. So what were some of the primary results of the studies? And the data I'll share with you represents several hundred different categories of heart failure patients. And to summarize a few domains, one, we had some of the patients keep a gratitude journal for a couple of months. And this we just added as a therapy on top of whatever their existing therapy was, which would routinely be physical activity, therapeutics, proper diet. So we had some of the patients keep the gratitude journal for 2 months. And that's routinely done out in the world. You might have done it yourself. I had done it in the past, just as a way to track how our life is going for us. So those patients who kept a gratitude journal for 2 months, a few things happened. One, of course, their sense of gratitude improved over time, which is typically what happens. It's often called developing an attitude of gratitude.
Makes sense.
Because you're priming your mind, your psyche, to see everything in the world with a sense of gratitude, appreciation. And after a while, that just becomes more of a routine and a habit.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
And also, the patients, their depressed mood went down. Their sense of chronic anxiety went down. Chronic anxiety is common in these patients, particularly the advanced patients, because they know they have a very significant diagnosis that could affect their mortality, not only ongoing morbidity.
Right.
They started sleeping better. They started having more energy.
Inflammation.
I was just about to say inflammation.
So inflammation went down, you're saying?
Yeah. We drew blood from the patients, at the beginning, at the end of the study. And those patients who kept the gratitude journal, now get this, this is really unusual. They had about a 23-4% drop in a panel of highly accepted biomarkers relevant to the cardiac health itself, but also just general systemic inflammation. You don't see that typically happen in patients. In fact, the patients who were assigned to kind of regular treatment as usual, they didn't have any change in their inflammation. In fact, it tended to go up a little bit, which can often happen over time. And getting back to the earlier conversation of polyvagal theory, those patients who did the journaling, their heart rate variability improved, meaning the vagus regulation of their heart, that part of the autonomic contribution of their heart actually improved. They were having more variability over time. And that is also clinically significant because typically with cardiac disease, variability decreases over time, gets worse, gets worse, gets worse, particularly the more failing heart. So gratitude as a practice, as let's say a faculty that we as human beings can adopt and foster in ourselves is very powerful, not only psychically, but biologically.
I love that because the way that that's coming across to me, it makes so much sense. But when I try and find a way to explain that in other words, it's having the gratitude journal is like what they call cognitive distribution, where you're getting your mind out in front of you and looking at it, interpreted, in some way through our own language. and then it's reflecting back to us. And that as a practice, that interfacing with ourself simply with a gratitude journal and what that evokes, the space that holds, what it cultivates, those moments, has an effect on inflammation, on our heart in that way. It makes total sense to me, but it's dawning on me more now, even years after I interviewed you, what that means, that the can of worms that opens as well. I mean, would you say that there are even, like, you probably worked with best practices, but I mean, drawn out from what you had these people working with the gratitude journal, there's more in daily life that we could add into that wouldn't really even like rub against the grain of our lives, seamlessly integrate, but really open up a window of conversation back with ourselves. And I really appreciate that. And it goes from a simple, and I don't want to oversimplify what a gratitude journal is, but it goes from something as simple as a gratitude journal all the way to biofield technology and what that can tell us about ourselves.
Yeah.
And I want to know, like, do you either of you know any connection between the biofield and gratitude?
I can speak to that, but before I do, I want to add another piece that came to my mind when you were kind of summarizing some of the information I shared with you, and it had to do with when you were speaking about gratitude is just one of the things we could potentially do as human beings. And we're primarily, at least in this epoch, we could say, beings of like a mind consciousness, where that's where so much of our faculties, our sense of will and activity in the world are centered. It's really our duty as human beings to cultivate and activate all the different faculties of our minds. And all too often, particularly in the West, we're very passive. And we're just kind of living day to day, and we're not engaging, and we're not developing and strengthening ourselves. And I think in part, this will get to the topic we were going to speak of later of sovereignty and human development. So I'll plant that as a seed. Yeah. But as far as the biofield, yes, we did some pilot research at our lab at UC San Diego, where we had people keep the gratitude journal, again, even for 10, 15 minutes while sitting in the lab. And I don't know if you're familiar with the BioWell. This is a device Tiffany uses in her work.
Konstantin Korotkov's?
Yes, exactly.
It's right there.
It measures the energy system of the body. And we had people do the BioWell test before, and then also after they did their gratitude journaling. And it was really fascinating, the findings that came from that. And essentially, so many of the energetic components within the BioWell, and Tiff could speak more to the exact variables, I don't remember them, but they all increased significantly when the person was doing the gratitude work. So it activated specific energy centers in the body relevant to the heart and cardiac health and cardiac, maybe chi or prana flow. So yes, I'd say there's a connection to the biofield, and that's as far as I know about it.
Wow. Specific centers in the body affected by gratitude, and that's exactly where you would expect it as well. That's super beautiful. What I would love to talk more about is like what is the biofield? Let's help the audience understand a little bit more. What is the biofield? And Tiffany, what did you learn that could be gleaned from something like BioWell? As for those who didn't hear me say, Konstantin Korotkov, I interviewed him for Psychedelica, season 1. So there were also tests done for people who had gone through ayahuasca, but this is super interesting because that's ayahuasca, for all intents and purposes, is great when handled responsibly, but also is a big intervention. Keeping a gratitude journal would be a good way to start, for a lot of people. So, but I would love the audience to better understand, what is the biofield? What kind of technology do we have? And what is it telling us we can start now gleaning about the human experience from bioenergetics?
Fantastic. Thank you for that. You were going to say something.
Can I?
Yes, please. It's so pregnant within him. He has
You've got me excited about the gratitude topic, particularly when you asked about the biofield And then you said something like, well, that makes total sense as far as the relationship to the heart. So when we speak of the human heart, what else is typically associated with the heart? Well, that's love, right? Across cultures, this is the seat of love, at least on a physical sense. And when we've done some deep reflection and contemplation on what exactly gratitude is, from our point of view, gratitude is, it helps a person participate in the phenomenon of love of creation itself. If you just consider that esoterically and energetically, from our own, let's say, spiritual research, that's what's going on. It's often said that love is all there is, that the entire creation is essentially comprised of love, that it's just different manifestations of love over and over and over again. What we call gratitude is the human experience of love and appreciation fundamentally of creation itself. I'd say akin or in parallel, or maybe we're experiencing just a slice of what the creator herself feels of her own creation. For me, for Tiff, that is what gratitude is. And that's why it's so transformative. So when we begin to foster that and develop it in ourselves, we're developing a deep participation actually in the phenomenon of creation appreciating itself.
Yeah. So that makes something else stir in me. And I guess I just want to mention, I don't know if it's really a question, but I've been reading the Tao Te Ching probably longer than any other like sacred or esoteric script. And in the Tao, and also a lot of stories associated with it, there's this concept that the world already has its gift and its perfection innate within it. And there's something about having gratitude for what is that seems to be a core faculty of the Tao, of a way of seeing. Like the Buddha had also said, right sight leads to right understanding, leads to right action, but you can't arrive at right action without those core fundamental steps. But like right sight is also how we frame our lot in life, or the cards that we're dealt. So I appreciate this because gratitude does seem like a useful tool as a practice for those who may not know how to appreciate their lot in life. But working with gratitude opens that channel of love back open and may allow them to see that life is a gift. Even in its hardship, there's lesson and there's more we can glean from it. Because gratitude, I forget who said it, but probably a ton of people, gratitude's easy when everything's going all right. And conversely, in the world right now, things are getting very volatile. And I think it's also a very prime opportune time to acknowledge that there is a lot to be grateful for in the world right now, as it stands, as it is. So that's just something that came to me. If you want to comment on that, that'd be great. Please, Tiff.
Yeah.
Please, Tiff. Thank you. Thank you for that, Ben.
Yeah, and I'll weave it into the biofield as well, because as a healer, and I really grapple with even using that word because I'm not doing anything. I'm helping a person be able to find their own salutogenesis, their own ability to regenerate themselves. I just become a willing participant to bridge a person, so that when I say the word healer, it's not in a responsible or hierarchical way. So just wanted to qualify that. But from that role from which I have operated at times, one of the key things that I will tell a person or suggest to a person that they do is immediately say thank you for anything that's happened to them, anything. And that makes a shift in the field, the field first, because the way that I see it, and I think many others, is the field has all the information. And then it densifies by coming into the physical body. And then we have things to heal at the physical level. But it's so much easier when we're working out in the field before it actually takes a spot in the body. But no matter what, no matter what the experience is, thank you. Thank you. As that shift starts to take place, there's a physiological change from what I just clairvoyantly see and clairaudiently hear, is an acceptance, a willingness to find the gold in that situation. And that starts to catapult a change, because gratitude is actually much more of a spiritual practice. If a person is, and how I use the word spiritual, is not of dogma, it's of your own relationship to spirit, whatever you deem that to be. And I think one of the interesting findings, to also come back to the gratitude study, is that gratitude in the mediation, you describe this better than I do, but in it was a mediating factor that gratitude was actually more prevalent, more from a spiritual perspective, right? Can you say that properly, please?
Gratitude was a mediator, statistically a mediator of the relationship of spirituality to all the benefits we saw in the patients.
Wow.
What that meant is that what we call spirituality in our culture, it's often comprised of a multitude of other factors, such as love and compassion and gratitude and other things. In the study, when we did a certain statistical analysis that basically showed, yes, if we use concept of spirituality, that was also very important and predictive in our findings, but it was only the gratitude component of spirituality that carried the benefits. The other things didn't.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you when you say it carried the benefits, you mean like statistically significant, you can measure it?
Yes.
Yes.
It's called a mediation analysis, and that was the findings. And it repeated itself again and again in many of the variables.
Wow. Wow. So we're speaking about that, and there's a word that we haven't mentioned as far as these faculties. I would love to hear your thoughts on it, and we'll get to the biofield thing, because this I love this tangential path that we're on. There's this book. It's called Vagus Nerve Compassion Portal, and it's by Carl Armstrong, The Anatomy of God's Link Within Our Spirit. It's a pretty cool book, but getting back to the vagus nerve, now he is going a lot into the Bible, but also a lot into science, and just making a case for everything inside the body has its spiritual function in some sense. But the vagus nerve, calling it the compassion portal, I'd love to hear your thoughts on compassion, because that sounds like there's a lot of overlap with gratitude. There's got to be a lot of overlap with love as well.
Absolutely. And I have that same book.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I'm making a collection of course, every different facet that we can look to, because I also, in my theory that I can't prove yet, because there's no way to measure the reticular formation, there's now starting to be ways of measuring the vagus nerve, but I do see the correlation energetically. So it's just a matter of time, I think, and coming up with the right sensors and being able to specify on these sensitivities. But the compassion portal is, if we lead with the heart, and there's many Peruvian healers. I was once in the presence of a shaman, and he says, the biggest mistake that I see happen in the Western world is that you think with here instead of here. You think with your head instead of your heart. And when we can lead with compassion, and I'm a recovering codependent, as most healers are, or most people that are in the health world, it's about detached compassion. So it's not jumping in on somebody else's stuff and trying to rescue them. But it's being able to holistically see that a person may need a loving phrase, a helping hand from a compassionate place, not from a rescuing place. And that rewards both people from my point of view, because one doesn't become less than. We all go through stuff. And when we can lead with compassion to say, wow, I'm sorry this is happening to you, in a way that feels overwhelming. And I still hold for you the potential that there's so much good to come of it. So, what compassion allows us to stay in that frame, almost being a bridge for another person that can't quite get there.
Mm-hmm.
And the Vegas has that.
I love that. I love that. And I love the way you mentioned it. There's two things you mentioned in that. There's the detached compassion, which doesn't seem to and tell me if I'm translating this correctly. The detached form of compassion doesn't really like interject itself. It just maybe watches from a distance. Whereas a good form of compassion, it sounds like holding space for one. What is holding space? What people in plant medicine circles and any kind of ceremony understands what holding space is. It's the non-judgment of allowing somebody to arrive at some form of healing, regardless of what it might look like as it's coming out, as it's expressing itself out. And that compassion holds the vision that this too will pass, and this is good. This is important, and I'm holding space for exactly what it is. There's no reason to, nor would it be healthy to divert this energy or try to turn it into something else, or, and I think that's also quite important in what I see in the world, at least the way it seems. It seems like there's always political divide and rift and kind of like controversy over very specific topics, but there's something almost in nonviolent communication that allows us to first hear the other first and then echo it back to them in a way of saying, like, is this what you're feeling? Yes, here's what I sense. And in the compassion way, it's, I see what this is. Maybe not having to solve it for you, not having to have the answer for you, but I am here with you. Are you hearing me? I wonder if it cut off. Can you hear me, Gorda?
Yeah, you're good. I just might need to give him a second. I think they're experiencing a little bit of internet delay. Oh, well, they're back. Okay, we're good.
Okay, we're back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No worries.
Yeah, you were frozen.
Please go on off of what you heard me say. If you heard it.
Yeah, I did. And I absolutely agree with, I love the nonviolent communication and Marshall Rosenberg's work. And it very much is about holding space. And also compassion is that, as an example, if a person is going through tremendous grief, sometimes they can't even cry. They can't even access those emotions. But a friend who might be witnessing that you go through that might be crying all those tears. And it's like, why are you crying? Well, I don't know, but this is just what I'm guided to do. Well, in that morphogenic field, if you will,
I hope they're back soon.
Uh-oh.
there.
We're good.
Yeah.
Did I
in the
lose you on morphogenic field?
Right there, in the morphogenic field.
So in the morphogenic field, we are aware of energies, and we just do that next right thing. I'm going to do that.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, the
The internet's morphogenic field has us.
Yeah.
The morphogenic field has us, exactly.
I think you're good. Just give it a sec to catch up. Your audio is working. I think your video is just catching up.
Okay.
We'll keep
Got it.
So you can just keep talking. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Okay, cool. So what that allows is that shared experience that, wow, I just need to cry these tears that you apparently can't cry on your own. So that's just an example of something that I have witnessed. And also I have experienced things where the person didn't have the capacity to carry that emotion. And that's another example of how compassion can play itself out. It doesn't mean that we are taking on the burden or the load of that. But in the shared experience, we can see the value that we can bring for helping a person along by recognizing where they're at.
Wow. That really brings up something in me that I'm trying to wrap a little language around. But that you mentioned the morphogenic field, and what I like about this is I've always felt, now let's go back to many of the times that I have done plant medicine or other kinds of ceremony, including meditation in my room alone. I've noticed subtle things, like I know that, and I don't know how I know, but I know when something is shifted in somebody else that I'm really connected with. But I also feel the same thing, that in plant medicine ceremonies, I've actually had it where the entire room is purging, or let's say the entire room is going through a wild part, let's say the peak of the experience. And there are a lot of people that I've heard say, like, I cried all night, but it didn't feel like those were my tears. And I felt like I was doing a lot of work for the room itself, for other people. Like I was purging for them, or I was crying for them, or I could feel where they were and I just held them, in my mind's eye, I held them. And then other times where they say, and I too have felt this, where this isn't even just this room. This feels like we're tapping into the planetary and humanity-wide collective on some sort, and allowing, almost being a release valve for some of the pressure that seems to build up inside society, especially societies where we've been told, on the male side specifically, like, chin up, wipe those tears, march straight, we need to get back to work. That type of, denial, stepping over the process of whatever grieving, whatever emotionally has to come up. We stifle that a lot. My upbringing, just from having military parents and military grandparents all the way back to the Revolutionary War, that was, a prime thing. So it kind of seems like when you're talking about the morphogenetic or the morphic field, something that Rupert Sheldrake talks a lot about, it starts getting into those topics that can only be, well, I mean, we have scientific language around it, but it seems like it gets into that science or the spirituality topic. And so what I'm loving about this is, like, where is the best meeting ground that you, or the most exciting meeting ground that maybe the two of you together have found, where science and spirituality meet? And I kind of want to lead this towards the books that you two are writing. And the tentative titles, let me just say that for Tiff, the book that you're almost completed with is The Biology of Transformation. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then also for Paul, Restoring Science as a Spiritual Path. These are powerful titles, and I would really love to dive into, and either one of you could start, but when you're talking about transformation, that's larger. It is, there's a biological correlate to it, but I know you mean more than that when we're talking about transformation. And then Restoring Science as a Spiritual Path reminds me of a Rudolf Steiner book called Thinking, or Intuitive Thinking as a Spiritual Path.
That's right.
And I just love that. So I would love for you to take that away. Either one of you could start.
You want me to go? You go.
Fine. Okay, I'll start. So yeah, this book that I've been working on, and if things go well, will be done within a year and available. It's essentially, pardon me, I've been recovering from a flu.
No worries.
It's essentially gets to this question, and there's so many institutions these days that exist to help heal the divide between, religion and science, and spirituality and science. What exactly does that mean? What is this divide, and how did it happen? And the way this book is trying to address that is, first of all, it's a kind of fictitious divide that should never have happened to the degree that it exists. And so I've basically been interviewing a lot of scientists about their scientific work. in the relationship of their own spiritual transformations. And the purpose of the book will be to let people know that actually what's often characterized out there is this great divide between scientists and spirituality, and that all scientists are materialists and they deny everything and anything beyond the material form. But that's, of course, not true at all. So I've been interviewing, and the scientists are very candidly providing to me their deepest transformative experiences. For many of them, it was spiritual experiences when they were young that opened up the world to them beyond the physical, that led them to become a scientist, because they thought to themselves, wow, what just happened?
Yeah.
What did I just see and experience? What is this other world beyond my typical five senses? How do I learn about it? Sure, some would start reading spiritual religious books, but many decided that the most systematic approach to knowledge is science. So they became scientists to study. And then there were other scientists I've interviewed who they were more materialists, and they were into science because they just liked it, and they're very intellectual people. And somewhere along the road, they had a spiritual transformation. And then we're going to document, well, how did that change their scientific work? And ultimately, how is all that work helping to transform how science is practiced today? What kind of scientific work is being done for the benefit of ourselves and society? And also, how's the education of scientists beginning to change so that young scientists don't have to feel so inhibited to keep that part of themselves in the closet, which is common.
Yeah.
As a professor at UC San Diego for about 30 years, I would have many young students come to my office, knock on the door, excuse me, Professor Mills, can we chat? I hear you're kind of spiritual, and I've got some things I need to speak about. And so I would speak with them and try to encourage them. Don't hide that part of yourself. Let it come forth, because that's the seed of your creativity, your wisdom. It'll guide you, faithfully guide you onto the next steps for your own scientific work and your own further transformation. That's it in a nutshell.
I love it. I love it. I think this perfectly segues into human sovereignty. I know that you mentioned we wanted to talk about this, and I love that. So when you mentioned to that student, don't hide that part of yourself. What I love about that is because it's like, if you feel it calling forth, or if you feel it within, like, invite it forth to speak, give it its room to speak, rather than, a systematic approach to that would be like, which could be good, depending on how it's done, but getting people who may not feel it to try and understand it and to try and feel it. But when somebody comes to you and says, I'm experiencing this kind of conflict, I'm in a science class, but I have this other side of me, and then inviting that out a little bit more. A part of that is, like you said, faithfully guiding, knowing that this is faithfully guiding you. There's an aspect of trust that I really want to get at here, because I hear a lot of, like, who are the trusted sources and what should we trust in the world today? And I always find that steps over the first question, which is, how much do we trust our own discernment? And what are we discerning? Like, is this my intuition? Is this partly my fear? And I think it's still good to engage and almost like seek the intuition as if it's in there, and like, what's the language of it? But with that being said, human sovereignty, what about that specifically? And maybe explain it, but what lately is causing for you to think that is a topic that would be, relevant here today, like human sovereignty?
Okay, I'll do my best to begin, and then I'm going to pass it on to Tiff.
Yeah.
And so I think partly what you said frames this really well these days, because so many people around the planet are being faced with very vital decisions. Should they do this? Should they do that? Should they follow this mainstream message? Should they follow another message? We're all trained and socialized to look for all the answers outside of ourselves. That's how our educational system works. That's how we're socialized. And it's really a pity, frankly, because we have all the answers within us. We just have to know how to get to them. And when we use the term human sovereignty, that's what I'm referring to. is the capacity for a human being to know without a doubt what is best for them. Do they go left? Do they go right? Do they do this? Do they do that? Do they proceed? Do they not? That kind of knowledge, that kind of guidance, we could say, from our higher spiritual minds, we could say, higher spiritual selves, is always available to us. We just need to listen, learn to listen, cultivate that, and then follow it. And Tiff has a very well-developed sense of sovereignty and innate knowing. And Tiff, it'd be nice if you spoke about gnosis and knowing with a G, as you often speak about in some of the courses. But it's when a human being operates from within their own self as a sovereign being. And sovereignty is a God-given right. And we should all be helping each other come into that. So, Tiff.
Yeah, there's so many topics.
Because you often say, I know what I know. There's no way anybody could talk me out of it.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to weave in here that it wasn't always that way for me. I was born clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient, claircognizant, all of the clairs, clair overwhelming, I call it. And I willed it away, and I didn't want it all. And then later on, I had adult onset OCD, and it was because I was trying to corral it, and the trauma and everything just needed to be come up and healed. And so I didn't know which way to go. I didn't trust right or left. And the information that was coming in, sometimes it was wrong. And, what was intuition? What was ego? And the smarter we get, the smarter our ego gets. And it's part of our development.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not meant to. I actually have a tattoo on my foot that I got when I was seeking to get rid of or annihilate the ego. And it was a very painful tattoo on purpose. And it meant to, sort of inform that about being, is it ego or is it self-love? And what I now understand is that it's not an either or, but it's about bringing the ego along.
Mm-hmm.
And not being afraid to make mistakes and to integrate these parts, not annihilate. Because if we think about it, for every subconscious aspect is going to fight like hell for its own dominion to have a rightful place in our life experience. And so if we go about anything by saying, I want to do away with that part, I want to get rid of this, this is sort of on our road to figuring out our sovereignty, on our road to figuring out our individuation. And it took a while for me to come around to say, I only trust myself now. I don't trust anything I hear. And it's like, it's got to go through my own digestion, my intuitive digestion. And by the way, that book that you also brought up about Steiner, this was a pivotal book for me, The Spiritual Path for Intuitive Thinking as a Spiritual Path. I was always arguing with myself, like, how come I don't have a guru? How come I don't have any guru that's alive? All these people have all these teachers that are alive. All my gurus are dead. Where's my live one? I never had it. I had mentors, but I didn't have a living guru. And when I read that book, it was like, permission to just trust thyself, to trust that inner knowing. And that is my inner guru. That deeper knowing, that connection, that vertical connection, I call it. And gnosis is in knowing with a G, not just knowing with a K. Mm-hmm. Carnal knowledge is temporary knowledge. And I love what Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj says about all knowledge is ignorance, really. And so what do you know that you know? What do you truly trust that you've embodied and experienced and come into your own domain of sovereignty with? And how do you become a great decision maker for yourself, even though it may include mistakes? And that's part of it, mistakes. There really are no mistakes. It's just experience. And so this is part of, for me, in we can get really highfalutin on the sovereignty conversation. And really what it comes down to is, what is the everyday practice? What choices are you making based on your what you know. What is your own gnosis? Your knowing with a G, where you really grok it. It's unquestionable. And the other thing I wanted to mention that I just made a note about when you were speaking about our relationship to the planet as well, not to diverge the conversation, but to add to it, I believe that one of the reasons that we're seeing so many methylation issues in humans is because we have been screwing with the methylation of the planet, how our waterways move, how we naturally have a respiratory system, and our systems of elimination have been hurt as an as above, so below kind of relationship. So speaking of that morphic field, also related to the planetary body that you were mentioning earlier, and then still keeping that sovereignty alive about the decisions that we are making in our everyday. What direction does it go down? Is it down the road of wisdom, or is it down the road of separation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what that brings up for me is this, like, how do we know what we know? When I take this back, I start looking at what are the different things we can know. And they're all different kinds of knowings, because I feel like if we had to read it somewhere or take it as secondhand knowledge from somebody, that's one aspect of knowing. But another one is knowing principles, like understanding certain principles and ways that ways that processes typically happen with their beginning, middle, and end. Almost like there's so many different ways of looking at it, but the hero's journey in a story, the arc that it carries is almost exactly similar to Wilhelm Reich's, I think it's tension, charge, discharge, and relaxation. There's also the Flow Genome Project has their own, where there's like agitation, then release, then flow, then recovery. And there seems to be this 4-step process, not to put some kind of formula over top of it, but the things that, like, I know about myself, I come to find that people who know different things when it comes to you had to have read it, that kind of knowledge, they can arrive at the same action step, or these are stepping stones, I guess is what I'm trying to say. A lot of the stuff that we can read, it's how we use it. It's how we use the information, where we already have a trajectory, we already have a momentum, and we use what we hear as a resource to go on that way. And for a lot of what's happening on social media is we're picking apart the vessels that people are using to sail themselves down their path, rather than seeing that all these different paths, like if it's working for them in some kind of constructive way where they feel they're getting nourished and that this is a part of their purpose, then it's super valuable. And so that again kind of brings it back to having gratitude for the way that things are, rather than being hyper focused on the way that person's logic is carrying them, as opposed to my logic and the way it's carrying me. We don't need to get hung up on the details. And I kind of feel like that inner knowing, it transcends the little truths, the trivialities, the technical details. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
Totally. Love it.
Yeah. Wasn't a question, but just kind of a riff point.
I'll add a little to the riff point, just that about this idea of following others, and we often evaluate and judge others, what they're doing, and we'd have this little voice in our head. A scientist friend of mine said that observation without love, that's what we call judgment. So anytime we're in a state of judgment, means we're viewing something not in a state of, foundationally in a state of love, which implies also acceptance and compassion and really support for that person and what the heck's going on for them, as well as us in that particular case. So I just think foundationally, as much as we can do to keep ourselves in that state of unconditional love, that's a center point to move forward in all different endeavors that we have in life.
Mm-hmm. Paul, as somebody, and both of you have found yourself in academia, but Well, actually, no. Tiffany, you also teach as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I teach more as a spiritual counselor and a guide.
Gotcha.
But I don't teach I've been guest lecturers at his courses and at the university and others. But I also teach the BioWell, if that's what you mean.
Yeah. Okay. No. I guess specifically to academia, and I guess so. This one would be directed to Paul. Like when you have to have had come across your own observation, with love of those who find themselves. I mean, I'm trying to find the most responsible words to say it, because I used to call it college kid syndrome, where it's like the way it comes out is less wisdom and more just like factoids that want to be repeated. And I think that's an important process. I want to be clear, because I think that's also part of how we hash ideas out before we turn them into long-term memory. But beyond that, when you see the danger of some people hiding behind only what can be proven, only what's in the books, and those types of things, and not really having their own sovereignty, or not wielding their own dominion of knowing something, but you see that they feel safe behind what they can explain eloquently and logically. What are your thoughts on that, and how would you approach somebody that you can tell deep inside they're looking for a way to break a shackle off, but there's that feeling of vulnerability that comes with not being able to explain what it is that because there's got to be a lot of that in academia. Am I correct?
There's a lot of that in academia. I mean,
In life.
you've mentioned in life. You've mentioned Rudolf Steiner several times. I mean, Steiner kind of tracked the shift in Western science up until his death, which was, I think, in the 20s. This movement towards materialism, this movement of what we can fairly say these days, closed-mindedness. The vast, vast, vast majority of scientists I know, paradoxically, are closed-minded. What do I mean by that? They've closed their minds off to the possible reality of anything beyond their senses.
Or what they can measure.
Which, I mean, if you think about it, and this gets back to the book, Restoring Science as a Spiritual Path, that is such a ridiculous position. Yes, we use scientific instruments to measure things we cannot see, but that doesn't mean nothing else exists beyond that. And what I'm trying to do with that book, and to address your point, is this notion of just how do we cultivate scientists to have an open mind again, to allow each other to foster certain kinds of directions. I mean, when I was starting out at the university, I was told really clearly by some senior psychiatrists that you will not be studying meditation at our university, even though it's something I had been interested to do there. So I didn't for quite a while. There's such a closed-mindedness. And then, maybe 12 years later, that department was one of the first centers for mindfulness in the United States. But the point is, these closed-minded kind of judgmental attitudes work against what science can actually be providing and teaching us all. I mean, imagine if all these different domains that science has ignored and really made as kind of a taboo, mediumship, psychic phenomenon. Well, the biofield sciences is still taboo. Well, that's loosening up. These sort of domains, if that hadn't been taboo, and it was wide open to study really the foundational spiritual nature of the human being, how would things be different now compared to where they are? I think it'd be remarkably different. And evidence for that is for scientists who do begin to make a change, not only is their own personal life, spiritual change, but the work they're beginning disseminating, in my opinion, has much more social impact for the good. I mean, there's so much scientific knowledge that comes out right now that's, frankly, a total waste. I'd say probably, you see that?
No.
Oh, we just had a bird hit our window out there. It went down.
Is he okay? No.
But anyway, I could give an estimate. Is it 90%, I would say about that. And that might be surprising coming from a scientist, but what I mean by that is we study so many things that don't directly relevantly help the average human being and human society day to day.
True.
There are, every year there's over approximately 1.2 scientific studies added to the biomedical literature. And the vast majority of that isn't important. It doesn't matter. It's not going to have any benefit for anybody. It's rare that it does. And the ones who make more important scientific contributions are the ones who live more by their inspiration and their intuition.
I love that.
And that's a fact. We've seen that again and again.
I really like that. I don't know about you, but I really want to know how that bird's doing.
Okay, I'm going to walk over and look.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Did you see
Yeah, that's fine.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
We heard it a little bit in the background.
Well, I mean,
You heard it.
Yeah.
That's pretty gnarly.
Paul was almost an ornithologist.
Is that
Oh,
right?
wow.
That's almost the direction of science that he went in. So yeah.
Wow.
So we have practically a bird sanctuary around here. It's amazing, but
That's great.
I'm going to stop. Sorry, I'll do that and then see if it refreshes. Sometimes that works.
No worries.
Oh, good. So in the meantime, the biology of transformation. So we just talked about, let's say a college student wishing to branch outside of that which can eloquently be explained, and stepping into different aspects of inner knowing. A transformation like that. Well, I guess I would just ask you, like, what exactly do you mean by the biology of transformation? What transformation are we speaking about here?
Thank you for that, Ben. And it's good for me to talk about it because I haven't really had many conversations outside of just writing on the topic. But some of it is my thesis, talking about these particular centers where we can look at transformation in a very holistic way. And what I'm talking about is the ability for the body to transcend a stressful situation, whether it be an illness or an emotional trauma or something of the like, where we can find the gift. And there's actually something that I've been learning from plant medicine, actually. I have not been one to activate. Oh, sorry.
Okay, I'm back.
We'll get
sad news.
Oh no. What kind of a bird was it?
It's a young kestrel, a sparrowhawk.
No.
One of the smallest members of the falcon family.
Oh wow.
He was flying so fast.
Yeah. So it's unfortunate because I had just ordered these reflectors that we're going to put on the windows. And they came in the mail about 3 days ago, and I hadn't been able to install them yet.
Oh man,
So
what a
I'm gonna put them on
reminder!
tomorrow.
What a reminder! Yeah. Well, yeah. So
Okay. Just to put a finishing touch on that is, we're always transforming something, and what I was about to say is that what I've been learning from the world of plant medicine, because I have a lot of clients who are utilizing that to assist a transformation, a trauma healing, or whatever might be going on uniquely for them. 90% of it needs to be integration, and 10% of it is about the transformation. So we want to be able to integrate in our lives, which means having tools of knowing how to transcend different stressors. And there's a biology that happens at a physiological level that it's more like it's going back to the areas of study that you were in of psychoneuroimmunology. It's the body-mind connection. It's how it is that our somatic selves, literally our self, is also in relationship with our somatic cells, cells. And when we think about that, every constituent in our body, every thought creates a hormone. And how is our body utilizing that information. Every second is a transformation of some type. And where I'm coming from is evolution. How are we evolving ourselves on the path? Because really, it's about how do we get to the place where we can ascend and not and really have our spiritual nature embodied. How can we do that more? And that's really what the biology of transformation is about. And I'm borrowing on the turn of biology of belief and from Bruce Lipton, and biology of transcendence by Joseph Shelton Pierce. And they sort of relate, but mine is talking more about this, our spiritual nature. How are we how are we growing in our evolution?
Well, that's a good question. How do you think we are doing right now? Not that we have to grade ourselves, but to point out at least good room for improvement or obvious obstacles we are coming up against. What are your thoughts on that?
I think we're in a prime moment in time to check out our own sovereignty and who are we trusting. And there's a greater divide than ever has been that I've ever seen at every turn, whether you're talking about what's going on with the pandemic or the how you're dealing with it, if you're doing the vaccine, if you're not doing the vaccine. It's a different sort of racism. It's a different sort of separation. And there's a menocide going on. It's a genocide of the mind. And we need to be taking back our own minds. So we're at a precipice of will we or won't we? And so this is everybody's individual decision to make. And I'm watching people who just succumb to the pressure of doing what, not necessarily what they feel that they want to do. They're not necessarily being true to themselves. They are doing what they feel that they need to do to fit into society. And I don't care what side anybody falls on. I have zero judgment about that. It's our own choices to make. And how are we living in an open-minded, open-hearted place of gratitude as much as possible, a place of love, no matter what decision anybody is making? And that comes down to how comfortable are we in our own skin and calling our own shots and really trusting ourselves. Sovereignty, our own holistic sovereignty.
Yeah, I really like that. And I would love, so Tiff, you coach clients. Have you ever coached couples?
Yeah.
Okay. Because my question would be like, I'm curious on what we were just talking about. There's this divide, and one thing that I've seen is a useful tactic tool, a methodology, a practice is how is this perfect, outside of the bounds of where I think society should be headed or whatever it might be. What is this perfect breeding ground for? Are there practices that you bring couples who are not seeing eye to eye through in order to see that this is, I know this seems like a very, very difficult time and it's got to be very challenging, but this is also prime territory and prime opportunity for X, Y, and Z. What would you say if you were coaching, not the left right, because I think that's too easy, but the divide that we seem to place ourselves in? How would you coach that if you were talking to a couple rather than divided people?
I bet Paul's really happy this is my question and not. That's not entirely true, because we just got done teaching a course called Personal Self-Integration, which is about knowing ourselves and understanding that. And how I would answer the question and look at the two people as their individual selves is, where is the commonality? Where do they share same? And then where are they getting diverted? Because there's usually a fear. And if we can deal with what the underlying fear is for what is at the heart of the separation, why is there a divide in the thinking all of a sudden? We've been together for 40, 30, 40, 50 years. Why all of a sudden are we not in lockstep like we have been in the past? And this is a common and very poignant conversation in a lot of people's families right now. And to find that place where there is more alike than isn't, and then deal with the underlying fear. What I'm finding is that there's a lot of I don't want to call it, there's two kinds of fears. There's the useful fears, ones that get us out of trouble when we're about to have something dangerous happen to us. And then there's the useless fears. They're the irrational ones. They're the OCDs. They're the anxiety, all of those things. Those things are not useful. And that usually is an indicator that our thinking has been hijacked in some way. So if we can come back into a centered state, what do we know that we know? And there's usually one of the two in the couple that has more of being able to have a balanced view. Usually, not always, but once again, we coach based on what are the commons, what are the likes, and then work from there.
I think that makes so much sense. I mean, and I can just tell you from a media perspective, macro, whether it's for financial reasons, you can go into all the incentive reasons, negative incentives from like an economics perspective, but so much of the media, it seems like, is by design about dividing. Let's talk about how we're so different, how this side is so different than you, and this side's so different than you, whether it's a left or right angle. You know, it's unfortunate because if so many of those mechanisms and institutions that have such an ability to reach the masses were more focused on what brings us together, what are our universalities, how are we more common? You know, it's something that a lot of people talk about when they travel. They can say, I went to Europe, I went to Africa or Asia, and I realized they're just like me. They're speaking a different language or not, but they're eating their own version of the food or this, but we're all just human beings trying to live a fun, good life with the people we love. And there's so much that we agree on more than we disagree on when you really do talk to people from more of a heart-centric place. And yeah, that's really, you know, part of what our role we're trying to do is go against, like, hey, we're not about divisive media here. And a lot of that media, whether you know it or not, is creating this subconscious anxiety and division that gives you these little subtleties of like, oh, if I see this certain symbol or something, then I think this. And it's we need to communicate. I mean, like you said, at a precipice point now more than ever.
So true.
Yeah, thank you for that, Gordon.
Yeah. And knowing how to communicate. A lot of people don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to listen.
Yeah.
They only know how to pontificate some of their own views, if they even have a willingness to share. So there's a lot of skills around communication. You know, I really see this all as a time. We're still in the Kali Yuga, right? We have not quite come out of that dark spot yet. And so it's skill building time. We are just to amass more skills and to ask for help when we need to ask for help. And also being able to really get back to self-trust. That is, it got eroded, and it got eroded because of a hijacking usually of something else. And so to find that place where we can really go back to an instance where you did trust yourself. And what did that feel like? What was that? Embody that feeling. Because we all have violated our intuition at times and go, wow, that didn't go well. You know, that I wish I would have chosen my first mind. And Carolyn Mace always said, first hit, best hit. First hit, best hit. Stick with it. Whatever that first mind is, go with it.
Yeah, there's something about intuition that I find. What I love doing, like with the nervous system, with different parts of the human, is speaking to it and communicating to it as if it's another, and listening back for it. And I really feel like with intuition, you have to give it a try. You know, a lot of people, they're like, what is intuition? And I really feel like, man, it's that thing that calls to you, but you haven't given it a shot, and it hasn't like amplified. Like once you once you give your intuition a shot and say, you know what, I know all signs are pointing that way, but something in me knows it's this way, and you actually do it rather than ignoring it and being like, well, that's what the herd is doing, but this is what I feel like I should be doing. And maybe it makes no sense. Like, this is even in bands, right? The band Police. Stuart Copeland, the drummer, Sting did not get along with him, was like, this is not you're making the drums way too complicated and blah, blah, blah. And he couldn't see it from this microscopic perspective, but zoomed out, Police is what they are largely because of that interplay between the music and the drumming. So in many ways, like, the listening to the intuition, it's almost like if you follow it, it'll start to echo back a little bit more, and there's almost a form of communication that seems to pick up with it. And you mentioned, so the Kali Yuga, and I've also mentioned shorter cycles of time, but not just days, weeks, or years, but a saeculum, like an 80 to 90 year period, has been observed in books like The Fourth Turning, several other books that look at this kind of cyclical way that economies evolve and things along those lines. And what you put it as is the same way that they put it as in The Fourth Turning, which is when you're born into a certain time period and you're coming of age in a certain time period. Like, right now, it's not my formative years, but I'm coming into my own during what they would call a crisis period. And if you look out at the world, you can see that there's evidence for a crisis period. And then you're mentioning that the Kali Yuga, well, this is skill building territory. Like, when things get tough, the hidden beauty in that is that it's prime for lessons for us to interface with the parts of us that are functioning the least. So it's a dirty job. It's a more difficult job, but it's not as perfect when you wait for it to get easier to start working on those skills. It's perfect now. So I love the fact that you're mentioning that there's something with our intuition that right now, with our inner knowing, with our human sovereignty, now seems to be prime territory and timing for really discovering the self. And also, I'll guess when it comes to all the divisive topics that seem to come out of media, what I love about it is something that Gordo sent to me before. It was just somebody on the left and somebody on the right debating. And what I really liked about it was when the composure can be kept and it stays agreeable and respectful, then it simply it seems to come up, and yes, you may have your preconceived notions about what the topic's about, but simply listening to people on the side you agree with more and on the side you disagree with, it starts to, again, sharpen that blade of discernment. And there's something about this time that seems so divided that could be seen as brilliantly orchestrated as well, for those with the eyes to see that this is powerful in that way. Please echo back or comment if there's anything in that you found worthy.
Very worthy, obviously. Very much appreciated. So I'd like to make a comment on a couple of things regarding intuition, humanity, sovereignty, and you mentioned this kind of sharp blade of division that's occurring now as a big opportunity. And this ties into earlier when we were speaking about just human development and evolution. And Tiff and I, we're fans of several different teachers from the East, but one of them includes, Sri Aurobindo. And one of the things we like about Sri Aurobindo is that, unlike most of the so-called Vedantic teachers, he didn't advocate just become self-realized, know and remember that you're the infinite total self, and then you're good to go, and just proceed living from that state. Aurobindo recognized the deep, deep majesty and wisdom inherent in a human being and our capacity to evolve beyond what we know ourselves as humans now. You've mentioned intuition several times, so did Tiff. Aurobindo delineates, which are concepts, but it's helpful, different levels of so-called higher minds, from ordinary human mind up to, say, the higher reaches of the Godhead or divine mind. One of those strata, we could say, he specifically calls the intuitive mind. There's another one called the illuminative mind, the overmind, supermind. I'm missing one other. But the point is, these are levels of mind consciousness that are already part of us. We just have to take the time and the effort, as something we were referring to earlier, to use our thinking, feeling, and willing to develop them. And as we do that, we are evolving more and more into our own sovereignty, certainly our own self-knowing, and unfolding our gifts as a human being. And besides just our capacity as individuals to do that, humanity, of course, itself is a being. You referred to this earlier when you were speaking about ideas around group consciousness, and you're in a group and somebody's crying for somebody else. If you can see energetically when people get together in a kind of group energy that occurs. And it'd be fair to say that's kind of a group consciousness energy that occurs. And there's a thing going on. Humanity itself, around the whole planet, has a similar kind of group consciousness mind that is evolving through space-time. And we're along for the ride, developing our own individual self, but also contributing to the evolution of humanity. And this is a tough time, but a massive opportunity for those who want to kind of step in and bounce off this opportunity in a way that helps them take those next steps further, follow that motivation. Because that's really why we're here. I mean, we could have stayed in the infinite totality of self. That's fine, but this is something else to really develop the mystery of this human mind-body system and what it has to offer. And it's amazing.
I love that. You mentioned in not so many words, you were saying at the beginning that we don't start at the end, basically, where Yarobindu Sri Aurobindo mentioned that it's not all about just what seems to be the final stage is like, what was it? How did you mention it? Seek enlightenment.
Yeah, self-realization, enlightenment. You move into the state where you're constantly living that state of self-realization, infinite total self. You perceive that all else is that same thing, thyself, and you just say, "Good to go. I'm done." But you've left behind, unless you perceive really the development of these other aspects of our mind consciousness and what they offer. And Aurobindo said, really, that self-realization aspects of that is just really the first step for a human being, really, to begin to proceed into its possibilities.
Yeah. So what that brings up for me is that I don't know, maybe it's a part of Western society. I hate always going back to that or having that be like a catch-all issue that we're all healing from. But it seems that we have this feeling of we need to succeed. And, if we're trying to climb that ladder of whatever success means to us, then a lot of us, we see the examples and the people that we idolize, and we want to like hop up the entire flight of steps or jump above all the rungs of the ladder and just latch onto the top. We want to be those rare exceptions to the rule that were gifted from birth or worked so hard that we got it before anyone else did. And a lot of the times we don't think of it as clearly as that. Sometimes we do, but I like this. Why is a movie not interesting if you were to just fast forward straight to the end and see the big payoff at the end? Because it hasn't been set up, and there's something poetic about the way it's set up. And perhaps this isn't a direct one-to-one correlation, but I also see life as poetry and loving and enjoying the way that the story unravels and weaves itself together. And I think synchronicity in life is very much so like plot points that pay themselves off in a story. It's like, oh, that's why he picked up that pen before he left. No one knew, and then now it's coming back in the story and it makes sense. And I think that a lot of the times synchronicity in our life has that ability to show us like you're on the right path, but like maybe relinquish the death grip on this idea that you need to be at some destination of the path rather than soaking in the experience of just walking it. How do I know if I'm doing right, or how do I know if I'm not doing right upon the path? And the guru in the fable says, keep walking. Like keep going.
Yeah.
You'll know.
I love all that, Ben.
You'll know.
Yeah. So man, I mean, I feel like this is a conversation that there's other words that I want to bring up. We talked compassion, we talked gratitude. I was going to bring up, here's a friend of mine's book, Jason Gregory. It's The Science and Practice of Humility. And humility is another one of those things when I'm thinking like faculties. We have the faculty of gratitude, of compassion, and then also humility. And these are tools for slightly different life experiences that we could be going through. And it's like, okay, humbling yourself is really important in this time. And I mean, we could go on and on and on, but I guess, in order to kind of wrap this up, I want to see what it is. Both of you are so incredible, and I basically didn't even get into the relationship side of it. Maybe we could quickly just kind of show how you two came together and what it is that, aside from the book, if there's anything that you want to talk about that you two are working on together, that you've helped each other with on the path of life, your paths converged.
Okay, so a couple of things.
Juicy.
One, I want to make a comment on the humility part first, and then I'll mention our relationship, a bit how we met. So the humility side, what does that imply? When a person has humility, it implies they don't have a lot of egotism. They have an ego and a body, obviously, but they're not egotistical. Deepak Chopra, and this has to do with the gratitude piece again, he said you can't have gratitude and egotism at the same time. And that is absolutely true. An egotist will never go out and acknowledge anything and everyone around them. A narcissist, no, it's all about them continuously. So another value of the practice of gratitude is it helps to soften and kind of bring the ego to a place of more neutrality and less of a sense of self-importance. And in that, then you naturally have more humility and compassion and loving kindness. And it also innately, when you tune down the egotism, that fosters a sense of equanimity. You accept what is as it is when it is, because there's less self-judgment, which you were just referring to a bit before. We evaluate ourselves all the time. We're judging. I shouldn't be here. I should be 10 levels up higher in the ladder. That's because we're judging ourselves. We're not loving ourselves for being in the perfectly right spot at that time where we should be. And then from there, we can move forward. So I wanted to say that about the humility piece.
I love it. Thank you.
Tiff and I met in a scientific lab, and all I could say is when I met her and we shook hands, I had an experience. And basically, I did not know up until that point that two human beings were able to experience that kind of love. I could leave it at that. Basically,
love at first contact.
Love at first contact. To me, it was an overwhelming immersion in, at the moment, I experienced this divine love. Love for the divinity, which I never had experienced with a human being. I had experienced with a non-human being form, but not that. So that was the beginning for me. Then I basically, wanted to follow up with her later. Hey,
what was that?
Did you experience what I did? And can we talk about it?
So what was that conversation like for you, Tiff?
Excuse me. Well, even prior to the conversation, when we shook hands, I had a heart opening experience where it just went, and I was like, whoa, I didn't know what that was. So when he wrote back and in his email, it said energy. That was the subject line.
Trying to keep it a little camouflage.
And because of course he had no idea if I was feeling the same or not. And we just had these meetings of just incredible connection and friendship and just cultivating, just being real and being just each other's friends. And then later on, life events changed for both of us. And it was like, oh, this isn't just this divine love, this agape love. It's also personal love. And what an immense fortune to be able to have this be in a beloved that I get to have an experience with of this time and space. And it wasn't necessarily always an easy journey, but no relationships really are. And now we're doing much more teaching together, and which is just makes my heart sing, because that was a vision I also had while when we met. I was doing these long sit meditations, and since then my guides have been like, get up, you're not doing these. You're not doing, you need to cough. You're not doing these 4-hour sits anymore. Just that's enough. And so, but I was given such visions of Paul and I doing teaching together, and I had no idea what that was actually going to look like. But there it was. So, and that was about 10 years ago, I guess.
Wow. And so what, I guess to put a bow tie on that, where I know you guys are teaching together, and I know that you did some guest appearances at university in Paul's class. Where do you see that headed? Obviously, the road unfolds ahead of us and changes the way we're really going to meet the future. But what do you see as like the future of you teaching together? And because what I love about you both is you're really serving in a way that I feel is grounded, practical, and really open-minded, which is a combination that seems scarce enough to me to really want to, bring your work out, help you bring your work out. And also, so I would love to know, like, what does that look like for you in the future? What do you see are some gaps out there that you are filling by coming together and teaching?
It's a beautiful question. Thank you. I'll take it first.
Yep.
What I will say, and I know I have permission to talk about this a little bit, Paul, is Paul has, yes, he's a scientist and grounded in when he's in the lab and doing things and writing papers and all of this sort of stuff. But if you know Paul for longer than 10 minutes, you know that he's also got this incredible, exalted way of being able to reach the cosmos at the same breath. And sometimes that is, it was difficult. It was difficult to have other kind of conversations with. And so we started, I was like, okay, we need to ground. We need to have this beautiful mind of yours, not just be where the conversation is all taking place in your head, but also in real time, in life, and being able to connect with each other holistically. And the tools that we did when we were working together was personal self-integration. And that's now what we're teaching. And this is I'll say it's an art and a science in some ways, that it's based in ancient teachings. It's got roots in the Huna shamanic tradition, where Ho'oponopono comes from. It's got Sri Aurobindo's, he teaches about, and the mother teach about the many selves, or our many selves. Rudolf Steiner spoke about the many selves. The Egyptians spoke about there are many selves. And I mean, Jesus talked about my many mansions. And Teresa of Avila spoke about the interior castle. And that's not just related to the chakras only. It's about the fact that we have more than just a couple of aspects of our subconscious mind. In this system, we're looking at having conversations and introducing us to 7 subconscious selves. And when we meet them, we are definitely having a journey inward, but also being able to think about like having a dominion over our own mind in a way that we can include other people in it, but not lose our footing. And the subconscious selves, they have their own fears, they have their own reticences. And unless we understand why a person might be afraid of having a relationship, and why they themselves are afraid of having a relationship, because that has a lot to female selves. And of course, I left out Jung in that list, but Jung has a lot to say about the animus and anime, which has a lot of this cosmology is also coming from, is based on this cosmology, I should say. So having an orientation of how do we do group consciousness outside of ourselves if we can't even do group consciousness within ourselves. And that is primary in before you go and do anything in the outer world. What's your inner world like? How true can you be to your own voice and vision? And can you do it altruistically in a matter that is honoring the divine, honoring our spiritual nature, and certainly the fact that we're on a human journey as well, in a corporal body. What does that mean? So there are these selves aspects that we are teaching. You want to add to that?
It's good. It's another way of this idea of getting to know yourself. And that you have to become someone before you can become no one. And becoming someone is to truly know all the different aspects of your human nature and integrate them and kind of have that as somewhat of a perfection. I'm not sure that's the right word.
Well, perfection, not in that way, in the Platonic way, right?
Yeah.
It's in beauty and balance and symmetry. And,
yeah. I forget who said it, but there was this quote about perfection that striving for perfection is a futile pursuit, but the act of striving for perfection allows you to arrive at excellence. So, you know, that and I love what you're saying there as well, when it comes to understanding, but not just understanding. It goes a step further. It's owning your own truth. It's owning your human sovereignty, and with that, enlivening that faculty. There's an aspect of health. You know, we mentioned, I don't want to go too off on this topic, but when you mentioned psychoneuroimmunology, the idea of like that, the first time I'd heard of that was in studies with Michael Winkelmann around tribes such as tribes that gather around peyote circles, different kinds of ceremony, whether it's plant medicine or not, but that doing it together produces its own form of kind of boosted immune system, is like these group activities. But I definitely like where you're saying that is in the same way you need everyone to have their own self-awareness for the collective, in the same way that, like, for Pink Floyd, everyone can be amazing, but if that drummer can't keep a beat, something is seriously off and the concert won't really be able to go on enjoyably. And that's a very real way of saying it. If we want to produce magic, there's other aspects inside of us, faculties inside of us that could be enlivened. And I think almost a lot of the urgency that people feel, and a lot of the political divide, and how volatile and right now it seems for people, is almost a frustration or an end of the wits of like, what do I do about this? Eventually, when, you know, it's either it's coming at me in the hall, or I'm going at it, but we collide, and there seems to be a lack of imagination, or a lack of you know, a faculty within us that sees that therein lies the harmony. And in that, with the many selves, I guess, to try and just tie that in, that we can also hold space for the fact that when you're dealing with another human being or other human beings, that they in themselves are many human beings, it almost seems, many personalities as well. And that, you know, we can hold space for who and what people are, and listen for that maybe middle path. Whereas our mind maybe only seems to go towards its left or its right, you know, and or its center, but maybe it's outside of even that framing. And in there probably lies an aspect of our health as well. So that was a big tangent, but that was the thoughts that came on due to the work that you guys will be teaching. So I like that. I approve.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
All right.
And I feel like closing the loop just for a second on that, because I mentioned just two of the selves, which is male and female, and the high self, of course, in that vertical relationship, which is one to cultivate, the mental judge self, the astral judge self, the body self, and then we as the outer self personality are the outer self. And so, yes, they are very different personalities. And they're kind of like these archetypal leaders of those elements of our field as well. And they have many different components and attributes to their personalities. So it's really fun to get to know them, and it encourages more creativity. So in addition to knowing ourselves, because it sounds so serious, but there's so much humor in the subconscious of what it intends to bring to us, and the healing can happen in that humor, and just like lightening up. It's really fun. Besides healing.
Yeah. I was thinking about that earlier, and I won't go into this tangent, but I really like that aspect about the humor and lightening up. You definitely see in moments where everything is urgent, and in the world, there seems to be this urgency and this crescendoing energy that some pockets humor just starts to come out, and then other pockets this is dire. How dare you make light of this situation? Right. And I think there's a very valuable thing that we're bringing up there as well, is sometimes we make a mountain out of a molehill or something to that effect when it comes to what does this moment, as intense as it is, require from me to meet it in even just the most efficient way. And a lot of times that's grace. You just, having the grace to know there's a lot I don't know about this situation, but what I do know is that, like, I want harmony to emerge from this rather than what I'm feeling right now, in the world. So with that being said, I guess, are you looking to have people contact you? Usually I have people say, like, give out your website, ways that people can get in touch with what you guys are doing or have done, past body of work.
Sure. And also just to riff with you a little bit on grace, is I believe that we are moving into an age of grace. And it's the skills that we are building as we get to emerge into grace, and that also becomes a practice. So there's a lot more to say and do on that topic, but we'll see where that takes us. But yes.
And the website is healandthrive.com.
Yeah.
Healandthrive.com.
Heal and Thrive. And
there's a way to contact.
Yep.
Tiff there.
Yep. And if you want Paul and I, there's a way to do 15-minute consults there. There's a resources page. There's a lot of different stuff, more on the personal self-integration. We will open up that we just finish doing a 12-week, and we will do again starting in April, where we will offer it again. So there's little snippets of the different open minds.
Yep.
Beautiful. Oh yeah, there's
Paul's page.
We should have our interview with Ben on there.
Yes.
Isn't that on there?
Yeah. Well, this is the new website that we're needing to develop.
It's being upgraded.
Yeah.
Perfect. But yeah, definitely that was a great episode. Yeah, so I really appreciate that. So this is where people go if they want to connect with you. I would highly recommend that people check that out.
We'll have it in the description as well.
Yeah, we'll have it in the show notes.
Okay.
And I appreciate your time, both of you, so much, because I feel like this could have gone on twice as long, and we could have just gone word for word. Like, what do you think about this word? And bam, awesome conversation comes out. But we can do this again in the future. I just want to say I really appreciate both of you. And I'm glad that we've gotten to hang out in Colorado, spend a little time together, get to know each other through Zoom quite a bit. And I really look forward to your books coming out. I will make a big stink about it when that happens.
Thank you for that. Thank you. More, please.
Yeah, thank you.
For sure. For
It's been a
sure.
joy.
I really
Awesome.
enjoy you.
And thank you, Gordon.
Yeah,
Yes.
my pleasure. This is
You
awesome.
both are doing amazing work
Yep.
with your dissemination of materials and information to help people be able to find their sovereignty. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. It's definitely a joy. It's something worth committing a lot of time to, and we've been doing that a lot lately. And what I love about this is as it grows, it kind of grows in this sense where it just grows into different hubs and networks, and it's building a bigger network out there of people who really just wish to see conversations be started, that start bridging some of these divides and allowing for a useful conversation around it. So I appreciate your feedback. We're going to keep doing this. For the audience, we do this every Thursday, 5 p.m. Every Thursday, we're live. We love getting your feedback. We've gotten a lot of feedback in the chat. And please just keep coming back. This is such a pleasure for me to have beautiful, friends, and I would say even mentors. Tiffany and Paul have been over the years, and just really excited to have this opportunity. Gordo, really, grateful to have you doing what you do on this show as well. And I hope all of you could start keeping a gratitude journal. If anything else, just start there. Start with a gratitude journal and give me back your notes. I would love to hear from you all. Get involved in the Discord chat below. At benjosephstewart.com, you can get access to the deeper dives, which are members-only content. There's a ton of that coming. And with that being said, just remember that all of you are gifted with the most incredible, versatile technology known to existence. And we need to start wielding that with love, openness, more humor, compassion, gratitude. And that in and of itself, that work, that inner work, those kinds of disciplines, the real reward of them will be intrinsic, not something that we need to, make sure we get it in our bank account or that we have it as a skill set. It will emerge naturally as the beauty and the art of our lives. So if I haven't lost all of you with all that flowery language, I appreciate all of you, and I'll catch y'all next time on the Ben Stewart Podcast.